You don't belong here. I suggest you leave before I call security." The man who said that was standing behind a mahogany reception desk in the lobby of Hargrove and Lind Financial Partners, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too small, and an expression that said he'd been waiting his whole life to say exactly those words to exactly this kind of person. The man he said it to was Kofi Asante. Kofi was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, with hands that spent more years on construction sites than in conference rooms. He was wearing a jacket he'd bought 3 days ago. Not expensive, but clean, pressed, the kind of thing you wear when you're trying to be taken seriously. He had a folder tucked under his arm. He had a 2:30 appointment. He had driven 40 minutes to get here. He didn't leave. He stood there at the desk and looked at the man, whose nameplate read Dylan, lobby concierge, and said quietly, "My name is Kofi Asante. I have an appointment with Richard Hargrove at 2:30. Dylan didn't even look at the appointment book. "Sir, this is a private financial firm. Client meetings are by referral only. If someone sent you here, they should have told you to call ahead." "I did call ahead," Kofi said, 3 weeks ago. The appointment was confirmed by email. Dylan's expression didn't change. "Why don't you have a seat over there and I'll look into it?" He pointed to a row of chairs near the door, not near the elevators, not near the other waiting clients, near the door, like he was already halfway out. Kofi had been pointed to chairs like that his whole life, near exits, near margins, in the corner where no one important would have to look at him. He knew what those chairs meant. He didn't sit down. He stood at the desk and waited. Here is what you need to know about Kofi Asante before this story goes any further. He grew up in Cincinnati, the youngest of 4, in a house where the heat sometimes didn't work in January, and his mother worked 2 shifts and still found time to quiz him on multiplication tables at the kitchen table at 10 at night. His father had come from Ghana in 1981 with $200 and a mechanical engineering degree that American companies spent 15 years pretending didn't exist. His father ended up running a small engine repair shop in Norwood. Kofi grew up watching his father fix things that other people had given up on. He never forgot that. At 22, Kofi took out a small loan and started a contracting company with 1 truck and a used set of tools. By 28, that company had 12 employees. By 34, Asante Construction and Development had completed over 40 projects across the Tristate area. Residential, commercial, 2 schools, 1 community center. He had never missed a deadline. He had never defaulted on a contract. He had a reputation in the industry for coming in under budget and over standard. He also had the kind of face and body and name that made certain people in certain buildings look at him like he'd come to fix the pipes, not sign the papers. He was used to it. That didn't mean it didn't cost him something every single time. The reason Kofi was at Hargrove and Lind that Tuesday afternoon was a project called Riverside Commons, a mixed-use development on the east side of the city, 6 acres of blighted land that the city had been trying to revitalize for 11 years. The project was worth $42 million. Kofi's firm had submitted the winning bid 3 months ago. The financing package, structured through Hargrove and Lind, was the last piece that needed to fall into place before ground could break. Richard Hargrove had called him personally to set up this meeting. Kofi had confirmed the appointment in writing, via email, with a read receipt. He had the email on his phone right now. Dylan was still not looking at the appointment book. There was a woman across the lobby, mid-50s, in a gray blazer, watching the exchange with the particular stillness of someone who has seen this before and is deciding what to do about it. Her name was Miriam Osei Bonzu. She was a senior partner at a law firm on the 14th floor. She had her own 3-lay meeting in this building and had arrived early. She had a cup of coffee and nowhere urgent to be for the next 25 minutes. She watched Dylan point to the door chairs again. She watched Kofi not move. She made a decision. She walked over. "Excuse me," she said, not to Kofi but to Dylan, in the voice of someone who has cross-examined people in federal court. "Is there a problem with this gentleman's appointment?" Dylan straightened slightly. "Ma'am, this is a lobby matter. I can see what you're doing," Miriam said. I've been watching for 3 minutes. This man told you he has an appointment. He told you his name. You haven't looked at a single record. So I'm going to ask you one more time, professionally. Is there a problem with his appointment, or is there a problem with something else? The lobby got quiet. Not loud quiet, the way lobbies get when something dramatic happens. Just still, the kind of still where everyone pretends to be looking at their phones but isn't. Dylan finally opened the appointment book. His face did something complicated. There it was. 2:30. Kofi Asante. Confirmed. Richard Hargrove's personal calendar, cross-referenced with the front desk system, flagged in green. I'll let Mr. Hargrove know you're here, Dylan said. Kofi didn't say anything. He just nodded once and took a seat. Not near the door, near the elevators, the seat he'd been entitled to all along. Richard Hargrove came down himself. That was the first thing Kofi noticed, that Hargrove didn't send an assistant. He came down personally, stepped out of the elevator in a charcoal suit, and crossed the lobby with his hand already extended. Kofi, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. Come on up. In the elevator, Hargrove said nothing about what had happened in the lobby. Maybe he hadn't seen it. Maybe he had and was choosing the polite path. Kofi didn't bring it up either. He had learned a long time ago which battles to have in which rooms. The conference room on the 22nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. There were 4 people already seated, 2 associates, a compliance officer, and a woman named Sandra Lind, who was Richard Hargrove's partner and co-founder of the firm, and who had the handshake of someone who grew up sailing and never let it. We've been looking forward to this, Sandra said. Your numbers on the Riverside proposal are genuinely impressive. The margins alone. Thank you, Kofi said. He opened his folder. He had 3 copies of everything. They went through the financing structure for 90 minutes. Kofi answered every question without hesitation, without notes, by memory. When the compliance officer pushed back on a liability clause in the construction timeline, Kofi walked them through the exact precedent. 2 prior projects, specific dates, specific outcomes, without needing to look anything up. When Sandra raised an issue with the subcontractor insurance matrix, Kofi pulled out a supplemental document he'd prepared specifically for that question, because he'd anticipated it 3 weeks ago. At some point, one of the associates stopped typing and just started listening. That was the moment Kofi always noticed. The moment when someone came in expecting to be in charge of the room and realized they weren't. By 4:15, the term sheet was initialed. By 4:30, they had a closing date. Richard Hargrove walked Kofi back to the elevator himself and said, I want to tell you something, man to man. I've been in this business 30 years. The level of preparation in that room today was exceptional. I mean that. Kofi said, thank you, Richard. He didn't say anything else. Some things don't need a longer sentence. The elevator doors opened in the lobby. Dylan was still at the desk. He was helping another client, a man in a very expensive suit who seemed to be having no trouble at all being seen, heard, and attended to. Dylan looked up when the elevator opened, and for a second, just a second, his eyes found Kofi's. Kofi walked past him. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't say a word. Some people think the victory is in the confrontation. They think you have to stop and make someone feel what they did. They think justice looks like a moment where the other person has to look at you and reckon. Sometimes it does. But sometimes the victory is in what you carry out of the building. What's in the folder under your arm? The closing date you have in your phone? The handshake from the man who came down to get you himself? Kofi pushed through the lobby doors into the afternoon sun. He called his project manager, a woman named Thea who had been with him for 6 years, and who had spent the last 3 months doing whatever needed doing to get the Riverside bid across the line. We got it, he said. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she said, oh my God, Kofi, close date's March 14th. I'll have the term sheet to you tomorrow. Kofi, I know. I'm going to cry. Don't cry, Thea. Call the crew. He sat in his truck for a few minutes before driving. It was a habit he'd had for years, just sitting in the truck after something big, letting it settle. His father used to do the same thing after a long day at the shop, just sat in the front seat with the engine off for 5 or 10 minutes before coming inside. Kofi used to watch him through the kitchen window as a kid and not understand it. Now he understood it completely. $42 million. East Side revitalization. 630 construction jobs over the next 18 months. A community center that the city had been promised for a decade and never received. And a lobby in a building where a man named Dylan had pointed him toward the exit. He thought about that for a minute. Then he thought about Miriam. He didn't know her name yet. He'd find out later, through the building directory. And he'd send her a handwritten note, because some things deserve more than an email. He thought about her watching for 3 minutes before deciding to act. He thought about what it cost her to walk over. He thought about the fact that she didn't know him, had no reason to intervene, and did it anyway. He thought about how rarely that happened. He thought about what would have happened if she hadn't. Would Dylan have kept stalling until 2:30 passed? Would Hargrove's assistant have come down to an empty lobby and assumed Kofi had canceled? Would the deal have slipped through a crack manufactured entirely out of a concierge's assumption about who belonged in a marble lobby and who didn't? Maybe not. But maybe. Kofi had been in enough rooms long enough to know that maybe wasn't nothing. Maybe had derailed careers. Maybe had closed doors that should have been open. Maybe was the size of a lot of lives that could have been bigger. He started the truck. 2 weeks later, Kofi went back to the building, not for a meeting. He went to the lobby and asked to speak with the building manager, a man named Gerald, who turned out to be in his 60s, thorough and visibly uncomfortable with what Kofi described. Kofi didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He laid out what had happened in plain language, with the specifics, the time, the name on the desk, what was said, what wasn't said, what Dylan had and hadn't looked at. Gerald listened the whole way through. "I want to be clear," Kofi said at the end. "I'm not here to get anyone fired. I'm here because I have a closing date in this building in 3 weeks, and I'm going to be in and out of this lobby for the next 2 years on this project. And I need to know that this building is a professional environment for everyone who walks through that door." Gerald nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'm sorry. That should not have happened." "No," Kofi said. "It shouldn't have." He stood up and shook Gerald's hand and left. He didn't know what Gerald did after that. He didn't follow up. That wasn't the point. The point was the saying of it. The matter-of-fact, clear-eyed saying of it. In the right room, to the right person, without performance and without apology. His father had taught him that. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be willing to speak in the rooms where it's uncomfortable to speak. Ground broke on Riverside Commons on a Thursday in March. It was cold, late winter in the Midwest, the kind of cold that gets into the joints. But Kofi was there at 7 a.m. with his crew and city council members, and a representative from the mayor's office, and a reporter from the Gazette who wanted to do a piece on the development for the Sunday edition. There was a small crowd. Some neighbors from the East Side. Some kids from the middle school 2 blocks over who'd been brought out to watch. A woman with a baby on her hip who told Kofi she'd grown up in this neighborhood and moved away 15 years ago because there was nothing to stay for, and now she was thinking about coming back. That hit him somewhere he didn't expect. The first shovelful of dirt went to Kofi because that's how it worked. The developer got the ceremonial shovel, the photo op, the handshake with the councilman. He dug the blade into the frozen ground and turned it over and stood there for a second, looking at the 6 acres of broken pavement and overgrown lots and chain link that was about to become something. His project manager, Thea, was beside him. His site foreman, a man named Bryce, who had been in the trades for 22 years, and who cried at exactly one thing per year, and had decided this was it, was standing 3 feet away trying to look like he wasn't crying. Kofi looked at the ground. He thought about his father in the front seat of the truck. He thought about his mother at the kitchen table, with multiplication tables. He thought about 12 employees becoming 60, becoming 120 over the years. He thought about the folder under his arm in a marble lobby. He thought about a woman he'd never properly met, who had walked across a room because it was the right thing to do. He thought about all the people who had looked at him and seen something lesser than what he was. He thought about how all of them had been wrong, not in the bitter way, in the quieter way, the way that settles into something solid over time, something you stop having to prove because the proof is just there, in the ground, in the buildings, in the people who are working because you built something worth working on. The photographer called his name. He looked up. He smiled. The Sunday piece ran with a photograph of Kofi at the groundbreaking, shovel in hand, crew behind him, 6 acres of possibility ahead of him. The caption called him a local entrepreneur. The article talked about the project scope, the timeline, the community impact. It did not mention the lobby. It did not mention Dylan. It did not mention the March afternoon when a man with a confirmed appointment was pointed toward the exit because someone looked at him and made a decision that had nothing to do with the folder under his arm. Most people never knew that part. But some stories don't need a headline to be true. Some things happen in lobbies, in waiting rooms, in the margins of other people's days, and they shape everything that comes after. Not because they stopped anything, but because they tried to. They tried to. And the man they tried to stop went home that night, sat in his truck in the driveway for 10 minutes, called his father, and said, "Dad, we got the big one." And his father, who had fixed other people's broken engines for 30 years in a shop in Norwood, because his degree was never enough for the rooms that should have wanted it. His father got very quiet. And then he said, "Tell me everything." And Kofi did. Here is the question that stays with this story, the one that doesn't have a clean answer. What happens to the man who doesn't have the folder? The one who walks into that lobby without the confirmed appointment, without the term sheet waiting upstairs, without the $42 million project and the handshake from the man who came down himself. The one who just needs a form, or a question answered, or 5 minutes with someone on the 19th floor. What happens to him when Dylan points to the chairs by the door? Because Kofi Asante walked out of that building with something in his hands. He had proof, he had leverage, he had a closing date and a name and a record, and a reputation that made him, ultimately, impossible to dismiss. But most people don't walk into those lobbies with all of that. Most people walk in with just themselves, and that should be enough. It should always have been enough.